Okay, we are live for
Cool.
another Tech at Scale. Andre, there are no other guests except you.
I'm
That
sure
is
we'll find interesting people.
that is literally it. I'll throw down my nice little disclaimer. I'm not gonna do the little intro thing because I think the sound is too loud on it when I watched the last time. I did open up an Adobe Premiere and try and turn it down, but every time I put it on StreamYard, it's so much louder. So, anyways, that's our nice little disclaimer, and we can get into today's episode about how to become a senior developer. And I'm not sure what the grounds is of, this topic. We could either go the route of, or both, how to go from like a junior or intermediate to a senior, or even I just thought about like the promotional path as well of how do you actually go through the process of starting the process in the company. So I mean, I don't know where you want to start. How did you adventure to becoming a senior? Was it luck?
That is a good question. Another contentious point, like right off the bat, probably yes. I think everyone there's a degree of luck. Senior engineer also means a bunch of different things at a bunch of different companies. The companies I've been at, thankfully, have fairly, I want to say, well described leveling. Like, this is what it means to be senior. This is what you expect from a senior. However, actually attaining those is where the situation gets a little bit fluffy. I got senior about 4 years ago. I would say the biggest driving factor was something we mentioned in the previous video, was owning some legacy or having some legacy code, making sure I kind of understood exactly what was happening with it, being in control of it enough that I got to do not quite greenfield stuff, but show a little bit of like maturity, show that I'm making the right decisions in terms of like, what are we doing it proactively, not wasting time necessarily doing the wrong things. It took a lot of stumbling, a lot of falling around and doing the wrong thing well, where it's like, yes, I fixed all of the bugs. And they were like, why? No one even knew about these things. They weren't even real bugs. I'm like, okay, cool. So being proactive, not always the best thing to do. But yeah, it took a lot of sitting down with my manager and being very explicit. Like, I want to be promoted. What do you want from me? Every week, I want you to tell me what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, and what I need to do more of or less of. And we go from there. But yeah, there's some luck. Every company has some leveling guideline, I hope, and have that discussion with your manager and trying to understand what it actually means.
I was very different. I jumped ship to get promoted. Actually, it was during a break. So I worked at one company and then I went off and did my own startup. And when I came back and applied for a job elsewhere, it was for a senior position. So that was my jump. And the argument was like, well, you haven't been a senior before. Why should you be promoted now? Like, or why should we give you a senior role? I'm like, look, I've had enough experience in the other roles, and I've passed this interview. And also, it started with like doing your own startup was like, hey, I'm jack of trade. There's a lot more things I've learned than just development. So it was very different. I didn't have career progression. The career progression happened on like management at the company, and then once again, like from senior dev to like, principal developer or principal software engineer. That was once again jumping ship and going to a different company. I don't know if that's my strategy. I mean, it is a valid strategy.
For sure.
I guess that brings up a question of, do you think it's easier to do that, or do you think it's, easier or better to just try and push through at a company?
Wow. My opinion of this has changed. Originally, I was of the opinion that like, and this was me prior to struggling to get a promotion. I was like, you should get promoted when you do good enough. When you do well enough and you meet all the check boxes, everything will be great and they'll promote you. Doesn't work that way. It seems like if you're in a company where you have this kind of description of what a senior does, and it's very vague, very like, can manage projects independently. Like, what is a project? What is independent? What is managed? Like, every single term in that sentence can be pulled apart. Like, what the hell do you mean?
Must tackle medium and large size projects.
There we
You're
go.
like,
No,
what are those?
absolutely. It's like, cool. And a medium is a what? Yeah, I completely agree with you. So I think when it comes to looking for a new job and you say to them, this is what I've done, and you provide way more detail than, hey, I finished a medium project. And you say, like, I worked on this, it took me this long, these were the features, this was the impact I had. Then the person who's interviewing kind of looks at you and goes, you know what, that sounds more like a senior role to me, or like a principal engineer, or whatever the case is. And then they come back to you and say, yes, this is the position you're looking for. So it sort of flips the tables a little bit. And I think that's why, in my opinion, there are good reasons to leave a company to get promoted. You're also jumping out of all the bureaucracy and leaving your junior title behind and anything like that. If you've interned and you've managed to go from intern to junior to mid-level to senior, there are going to be people in the office who still consider you the intern, and that's not going away. So yeah, I think leaving there possibly a good decision. But
Yeah,
it's
I
a big stretch.
agree. I do think there is definitely an easier path to leaving than the struggle of going through a company. I mean, every company is different, obviously. Like, grain of salt, your company might be much more easier, might have a very well-defined career path. You might have climbed it. You might be like, hey, must have done X, Y, Z. This project will get you promoted or increase revenue by X% and you just auto get promoted. Great. But a lot of times it's like, it's hard because you're fighting for that position against everyone else too, because there's only so many slots,
Yep.
right? Like a company's not going to promote everyone to senior, out of even if you have 5 capable people, they might say like, look, there's budget constraints. So only 2 out of those 5 are actually going to get promoted. The other things are just like, well, you don't want a team of just all seniors either, right? And there's different levels within the senior itself, right? Like, just because you're a senior, it doesn't mean like you still have the equivalent experience of the senior who's been a senior for 15 years, right? But so I do think it is definitely easier to look elsewhere. The other strategy I have seen deployed is to look elsewhere, get the offer, and then come back, because
Yep.
you kind of accelerate the process. For
Absolutely.
those who are developers and haven't dealt with management, I will say that a hack there is always have your conversations before your evals. Like I always say, at minimum 1 or 2 quarters out for whenever your formal process is to get promoted. And the reason is, if you're in management, you know that everything's on a quarterly basis for budget. So if you're not talking about it 1 quarter before your evaluations, the money's not going to be there. The other thing is just you don't want to get an eval and they're like, well, great, let us define how to get there. And now next eval, we can talk about promoting you because you can prove it. No. Get that shit done before the eval.
So you've touched on a bunch of interesting points, I would say.
Yep.
The dry promotion situation is becoming more and more common. You're doing great, giving you a new title, giving you more responsibility, giving you more stress, and then you ask for money and they're like, don't worry about it. And you worry about it. And it might come, it might not come, it might be mediocre, it may be a year delayed. Essentially, the company is winning in this situation. And I don't personally know how to fend for, or how to defend this situation, because it seems like from the company's perspective, it's the best business decision they can make. They are going to get a full 12-month cycle out of you if you only have annual performance reviews or annual focals where they actually do the leveling and adjustments. And in that time frame, you're probably actually going to work harder than you would as a normal senior engineer or whatever the title is you're going for, because you don't want to miss. So they're like, prove to me that you can do this. here's like a prolonged kind of trial period. Let's see what happens. And it's terrifying because you don't know how hard you have to push. You don't know what's actually happening. You aren't being compared. And dry promotions are one thing. When they say to you, you've been promoted, you're now senior, we're not going to pay you. Cool. Everyone looks at you and says, you've got senior authority, you're good to go. The dry promotion, when they say to you, we need you to behave like a senior for a year, and then maybe we'll promote you, puts you in this really weird limbo state where you don't have the authority of a senior engineer,
Yep.
nor the pay, nor the experience, but you're expected to behave like a senior engineer, which is very kind of I've seen it happen to other people, and it's difficult. It's very, very, very difficult to even progress beyond that little weird limbo state.
So we talked a bit about how to go about it in terms of like process, but how does someone kind of go about, like, you're an intermediate developer. Let's say you've done development for 3 years, we'll say. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, man, I just need to get to the next title. I want to become senior. The company has career progression path, and my manager says that it's doable. But what does that person need to do on a technical level, do you think, to kind of level themselves up? Or is there one trick here that is just like, read about design patterns? Or
That is a good question. The things that worked for me and the things that didn't work for me were surprising. I like to plan, and I like to plan like great detail for a quarter, sort of moderate detail, and then like have some horizon plan. None of that works in the jobs I've had. I can't plan 6 months ahead because I have no idea what's in the pipeline. It took me like 3 annual reviews to look at this going, I can't even remember what the hell we were talking about when we wrote these goals. That project doesn't exist anymore. It didn't last for anywhere near the amount of time we thought it was going to do. So that whole plan of like, sit down with your boss or your manager and be like, I'm going to work on this project in 12 months time. I'm going to deliver features XYZ. Bullshit. There's very little chance that you're going to have to get that right, because the project is going to be so in flux, unless it's a very high level, like, we're going to improve performance on this thing that we know is not going away. That's more likely to stay on track than something that goes flying off the rails. But the thing I found that really worked were 2 things. Just have upfront conversations on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis of, what do you need from me? Be useful to your manager. It doesn't matter. Like I mentioned, I went out and fixed bugs and was like, hey, I fixed all these bugs. They were like, I don't give a damn. Why didn't you do this? Like, why didn't you write this doc? Why didn't you fix this? From a technical perspective, you can look at these things and be like, I refactored this thing. It loads way quicker. It's done all this stuff. So like technically beautiful. All the new devs are going to love it. There's like erasing technical debt, and then there's into this like perfection phase where you're just wasting time considering what the deliverables are. So figure out what your manager actually wants. And the other one is, when you are a senior dev, you do not get blocked and you don't block others. Those are like, if you're a junior and you have your stand up and you're like, hey, I'm blocked. Cool. Someone miraculously goes, let's chat about this. Let's figure out how to unblock you. Let's figure out what needs to be done. When you're senior, there isn't someone to really look at to unblock you. That's a big conversation. That's the kind of conversation that you can walk into your manager's office unannounced and be like, I am blocked. We need to fix this right now.
ASAP.
So that's the thing. And changing your mindset to like, how can I really unblock myself? Very few times have I, since this whole idea dawned on me, very few times have I been like, wow, I'm really blocked. Like, phone the person, walk to their desk. I don't know, send them a fax. Like, just get yourself unblocked. Find a person who might help. Phone the person's manager. Get it? That's what you got to do. Like, just stop thinking about being blocked.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely having the skills of, it's the autonomy and mastery to be able to find a path forward, regardless of the scenario. That I definitely agree with, is something that, intermediate people will be sitting there and looking for work to come down from like the heavens above. And I was going to also say, on the manager side, the worst thing to ever have happen is someone comes and tells you, look at all this nice stuff I did. And you're like, that's great, but we're 3 weeks behind schedule. And why are you not working on the backlog tickets that we know we have to do? Like, I appreciate tackling the technical debt right now, but we're 3 weeks behind on the project that like we're getting crushed by PM or like 2 levels above me are asking daily about updates of when this is getting out. Like, I really agree with the statement you said. It's like, regardless of senior or not, you want to be promoted, find a way to just make your boss's life easier.
Yeah, that's it.
And obviously, organization is one, and the less hand-holding of, hey, I don't know how to do X. It's like, the statement I tell a lot of my team is, imagine I was dead. Now what?
Yep.
Like, are you just gonna sit there and twiddle your thumbs all day, or like ask other people on the team, or spend more time researching? And like, obviously, there's a balance there. You don't spend like 2 weeks being blocked and trying to unblock yourself and not speak up and be like, hey, I'm in this weird bug scenario on this super, iffy scenario that I've never been in, and not saying anything for 2 weeks, because it might be something as simple as someone else going, oh yeah, it's some blah, 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 blah that we always know about. And, it's always some famous thing like, oh yeah, it's because the Windows version you have on the Docker container that we have doesn't support X.
Exactly. That's too true. It's weird. The thing you just mentioned there is exactly that. The being blocked, speak up is probably the first step. Like, don't be a Rambo. Don't be the person who's like, I can do this. I'm going to stay up until 3 a.m. digging through the commit logs for Docker. You're like, whoa, that's probably not where the problem is. Like, take it easy. Yeah, the other thing you mentioned that was interesting was like the backlog is transparent to management, but it's not necessarily transparent to devs. And only when you have these conversations and you go like, I'm happy doing these things, but you know what? I actually enjoy doing, I need something a little bit more meaty that might be like interesting to me and everyone else hates it. I want to write the docs for the next version of this feature that we're busy working on. And your manager could be like, that's amazing. You're showing initiative. You're doing something that clearly we need to do. That's not, I don't know, re-implementing everything in Go because that's this month's fad, and like actually progressing. So it took me a long time to understand that the visibility of things I had was intentional because I don't need to know everything that's going on.
Yep.
However, it doesn't mean that it's confidential. It's just being kept away from me because it's not needed. When you start these conversations and you start opening up and saying like, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go, all of a sudden you get a lot more insight. And then you also get visibility into the whole picture. An uncle of mine likes to refer to it as like the leaves versus the tree. When you're junior, you've been tasked with taking care of this leaf. You're like, this is my leaf. I'm making sure it's fine.
Yeah, the tree and forest.
Yeah, and the tree could be getting cut down, and you're like, I'm going to protect this. And like, no, we don't need that right now. We need everyone to see the bigger picture and work on this. So there's this interplay between the zooming in and zooming out that's hard. I still get it so wrong. The tech in me is like, I want to optimize this. I can do better with this solution. I'm not happy with this PR. Let me push harder. And
I think the easy thing is, personally, I feel like we need a series on like manager dev series, like the Apple Windows thing of like what different people would say and whatnot. Because I was gonna say that one of the things I really think helps someone becoming a senior is stop coming to ask to do something. You state what your intention is to do.
There we go.
And if it is incorrect or not the correct priority, someone will correct you on what you should be working on. But up till that point, it should not be like, what is my next task? It should be, I am going to work on the new docs for blah.
Yeah.
And if it's incorrect, someone is going to say like, that's probably not the priority. Or could you help me with X? Or have we finished blah, blah, blah. Just because it, weirdly enough, shows that you think that's the priority.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think a lot of developers miss that. And the more and more you go up the ladder, I feel like the more the like leadership qualities kind of take over, and that you have to start considering this kind of stuff where it's like, okay, what is the company's priority? What has product said what the priority is? And then from my standpoint, what is the priority I could tackle on the engineering side to do that? Right. Like, because like if it says like implement new feature X, yeah, but there
Mm-hmm.
could be 50 technical requirements underneath that. But which one of those 50 technical tickets are of highest priority? You know from the feature level what the highest priority is, right? Do feature X.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it just, the more you understand the business, the easier your life is going to be. So and I really don't think developers early on don't spend a lot of time on that. They're really focused on what's the technical, how do I solve the technical problem? I'm all about code, and that's great. But at least for me, as you progress, there's more and more questions about like, what does the customer actually mean when they ask about that feature, right? Or what is the intended behavior for the business? So,
I mean, I joked with a junior engineer I worked with about being 10x. And the context came up because they said to me they're working on something. I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then I said to them, hold on, we're actually maybe not needing this right now. This feature is great. However, the feature is a bit, it's vague because it's branching off of two other features. It's like, if we go this direction, we can leverage something that's already done. If we go this direction, we have to do it ourselves. And this dev was busy looking into it, going like, let me do it preemptively. And I said to him, like, stop the implementation details. Just answer the question of, is this technology we are using viable? Can we do this? Yes or no? And he was like, but what about like a PR? What about like a code review? I'm like, the task here is a ticket. When that ticket comment says, yes, this is feasible, we can use this version of this version of this, and this version of this. Those will all play nice with this. We're done. And he was like, oh, then I'm done. I'm like, cool. You're a 10x developer. You just did that 10 times faster than could have gone because you didn't actually have to dive into all the other weirdness. It's just doing like the best code, the best PR, if you're not removing code, is just not doing any changes because inevitably changes make bugs, which sucks because a dev wants to write code. But
yeah, I was going to say, I know someone at my work, their quote is like 2 days in the labs saves a day in the real world or something like that. And especially like, you know, okay, you're a senior dev or you're up the senior ladder, or an architect. Most of your time is spent not writing code. It's how do we write the least amount of code possible to get the most effective implementation to cover the business requirements.
Yep.
And not break anything and not tie us to some debt that we're going to have to carry forward. So
that's it.
But,
go ahead.
Oh, that was it for me.
I was going to say, I had a conversation with an architect a long time ago, and it was fascinating because you think when you, or I did when I was studying, I'm like, I'm going to meet these people and there's going to be these architects and these people are going to know everything. They're going to be able to tell me like what the minor dot releases of different compilers have in them so that you know what is happening inside. Meanwhile, fast forward to like actually having a sit down with them, and the conversations go along the lines of like, what process do we put in place to stop people from doing this mistake that's happened 3 or 4 times? Why? I mean, irrelevant of the code, how come every time someone touches this piece of code, something goes wrong? It can't be the logic because what it's doing is trivial, but why do people keep breaking it? So how do we stop this? How do we break it into two pieces so that we like half the blast radius, or how do we put it behind something that ensures that everything's working? And those kind of conversations are very different. They're almost understanding the devs and how they're doing it, and understanding what you're doing to make things go wrong, not just going, hey, I know, let's put like a bazillion exception checks in there. That doesn't help. The example we had was someone went in, they followed a process of migration. You've got to take the database, create a dump, move it across, start the new DB, put the dump on the new DB, start it up. There's no safety mechanism in this order of operations. Someone took the database, created the dump, turned it off, didn't turn the other one back on. And a cleanup process ran and went, cool, nothing's here, delete, 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 delete. And everyone's phone started going off everywhere on Earth. And this is a question that all the code in the world could not have stopped this from happening. If you think about the fact that these were completely distributed systems, this was a people problem. And fixing that is a different scope all in itself. So it's a different way of thinking. And it's fun when you think about it in terms of code. People are like the units of code. It might sound diminishing, but it's actually kind of complementary in that the devs understand how code works. So if we can translate that skill into how people work, you're going to do really well. Those are the people who are amazing. Those are the people who just get things done when they understand what's happening.
So I guess that is a good question of, I broke the site.
Whoops.
I can't change it. Darn.
It's changed.
Oh, okay. I don't see it on my side. I still see today's topic, how to become a senior developer.
I've got what's holding most people back.
Yeah, that's exactly what it should be. So I was going to say that's a good leading into what is holding most people back, do you think? Is it related to, thinking above the technical requirements, or is it understanding from the business aspect? Is it just putting their head down and just, hey, you need to know better design patterns? Like, you're not good enough on your actual technical background, technical knowledge. What do you, in generality, we're talking, right? Like, seeing.
So I've worked with people who are brilliant, like absolute, like 1%ers in terms of the skill set. They're probably going to go a very long way, and I hope they remember who I am when that happens. But these people have insanely high performing ability in some dimensions of what's required. They're like top 1% of debugging. They can hold all the context of the system in their head. However, interpersonal skills, non-existent, just as an example, or ability to estimate, completely broken. It looks to me like as time goes on, they're leaning into their strengths, but they're missing kind of the table stakes of some of the dimensions that are required. You can be insanely good. You can be the best dev on earth, but if you don't reply to your emails, that's probably going to cause a problem sometime. If you don't know how to estimate, saying to your manager, just calm down, it'll be fine, it's probably not going to get you a promotion. So I think it's being very honest with yourself and being able to find someone who can be honest with you to say, like, listen, you're a freaking rock star, but go and figure out how to do this thing that you're just terrible at. Like, you've got to up your skill on that. And I think that people are blinded because they're so good at what they do and they keep leaning into what they're great at that they forget to sort of step back and be like, hold on, I suck at my communication skills. I am horrendous at presentations. That's another thing. I mean, I've seen architects who one-on-one, they can tell you everything you need to know, the most minute detail to the biggest like reasoning for the design decisions. Put them in front of a group of people more than 5 or like, God forbid, like 20 people in like a large presentation.
Yep.
It's like they just can't function. And that's a problem because the next run of their career needs them to be able to talk to large groups of people. So it's identifying the things that aren't being met there. Like, do you check all the boxes? And you can't necessarily offset one with another.
So I'm guessing you're thinking jack of all trades is probably better than an expert in one narrow field?
I think there are balances. So I know principal engineers who are operational gurus. They can see things happening before they happen, and they'll come into the meetings and be like, I don't think we should take this approach. We've seen this approach taken before. It's going to cause this and this and this to go wrong. And you're like, oh wow, that was amazing. They can't dev to save their lives. They can't design large scale systems. They can't do these things. And then on the other side, I've met people who are incredible when it comes to like, I need you to do this. Can you implement a proof of concept for us? They'll bang it out. It'll be brilliant. It'll be far better quality than proof of concept, but give them a Sev 1 in the middle of the night and they're useless. So there's those can be offset. You can kind of put someone there, but if someone doesn't meet the table stakes of like communication or basic estimations, they're going to be difficult. And God forbid there's a toxic person. There's a big deal. Like that's a problem.
I guess for me, I do think it's probably general advice to be the jack of all trades. The general advice to be the jack of all trades. I think it's a safer bet. I see a lot of times people think like all they need is to just put their head down and read every Martin Fowler book there is, and they'll become the master of all singers. And there is some truth, like I said, like as you were saying, like you can either go to like somewhat of the extreme, and that will carry you so far, or that might not carry you as far as you think it is. Like if your technical skills are 80% there and your people skills is 0% there, it's like, well, you're probably not going to get it. But if you're like 5% people but you're 95% there on your technical, it's like, well, that might be enough to carry you a little bit. I don't know. I guess I've just had too many spots where I see people where it's like, all right, I want to go for X promotion, and it's like, you don't know shit about operations. I'm not saying you need to know everything, but I'm like if I put you in front of, like, as you were saying, like a Sev 1, you wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Like aside from like, oh, if it's a code bug, yeah, but it's like that's not the only thing that could be happening, right? Like there's indirect consequences to your code, like performance impact bottlenecks, like IO, like how do you figure that stuff out? So yeah, generally my advice to a lot of people is broaden out, become more of a jack of trade, which sounds weird because when you're going for a promotion, you think you would be narrowing down on your expertise.
Yep.
But I usually think that people have decent foundations of what they are doing day to day, and then the rest is like, well, it'd be really helpful if you knew the rest. Like, if you're the top 10% of one thing, top 10% of the other, you're top 1% combined. That's always what I tell people. Yep. Versus the other way, if you just want to be top 1% in X, you got to be just the top 1% in that, and that is extremely difficult for most people. So
exactly,
yeah, that's it.
I mean, I've spoken to people when that question has come up saying, how do I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10? Or do I call myself an expert? A long time ago, I was told the explanation that if you give yourself maximum rating, it means you've written the textbook that's currently being used by universities to teach that topic. Then you are the expert. Until that happens, you're good. It's not like the scale is scary when you go onto like an international scale or like worldwide with everyone competing for the same job. So yeah, being 1%, if you're going in just on that skill, you need to be the person the history books refer to, like John Carmack sort of level of performance if you have one skill to go for. Weirdly enough, I would say the strongest thing I've got that's gotten the attention the most is operational incidents, which aren't dealing with people, but dealing with systems that there's no familiarity, or the people who there's no familiarity either because the people who wrote them aren't there anymore, or it's the glue between components. Why is this thing not working? And it's It's interesting because it needs no context. Actually, the fact that I have no context is beneficial, and you just arrive and go through the list calmly and try and figure out what is going on. It's the thing that has gotten me in the same room as architects. It's the thing that's gotten me invited to have coffee with VPs to sit down and be like, tell me what you think about this and this and this because of this ops issue we've had. And the visibility that's come out of that is probably way more than any single feature I could have developed. As the junior developer moving to senior, the scope you have is only so big. You could fix every single bug in your team's backlog and probably still not get the visibility of something that was critically urgent that needed to be done immediately and already had the eyes of those senior people, which is important because your name has to be known when these promo packs come up. You can't be like, oh, who is that? That's not the time.
Well, and actually, that's something else I was going to say is like visibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing. Having people understand what you're working on, why you did it, how it impacts the rest of the org, taking the initiatives on like lunch and learns, even just to talk about whatever you've implemented. It all helps make the case. And I think the more things you're doing, the better chance you have. Because if other people aren't doing it, well, that's more check marks for you. Like, hey, show leadership in the organization. You're like, well, what's the lunch and learn? I'm showing the rest of my peers what I did, and like I'm leading the pack. No one else is doing it, so it must be leadership. So
that's a nice way of looking at it.
Wow. That's what I tell all my reportees when they go up. I say, do the lunch and learns. One, because you can make the argument that you are leveling up the rest of the org. If no one else is doing the lunch and learn on what you're talking about, you are leading the pack, which means you are showing leadership. And if that's something that you need to show to get to a senior level, then so be it. That's what we'll use.
Yeah. So I have a sneaky hack that's now letting out my secrets. But what I tend to do is the visibility goes so far with like trying to be sincere and genuine. Everyone's seen or worked with that person who's like the first person who jumps the line to be close to the VP when you're going into like the conference venue, or tries to like strategically go to that coffee machine right outside the manager's office. And it's pretty transparent. It doesn't really work that well from a genuine like visibility perspective. So what I've tried doing is I try as best I can to have context, at least at a high level, of what my peers are doing, in the hope that if I run into someone who's doing something and they're stuck, I can reference someone else. And I try and be the go-between. And if you do that enough, your manager hears your name from someone else on the team because they're like, oh, Andre said this, and I spoke to this person because of it. And doing that, it seems like you talking about yourself to your manager is kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. A peer talking about you carries a lot more weight. And that visibility works really well within the team. If you start doing it beyond your team, that's when it really becomes powerful, because then you've got two managers who both know about you. And potentially when the question comes up about who needs to do something, or if some urgent project comes up, more people know who you are for what I hope is a better reason. And that seems to have worked pretty well, rather than trying to like force myself in or wedge myself into conversations.
Well, and information is very powerful. Like it helps knowing what everyone's up to, because it lets you know what you should be focusing on too, right? Like, oh, you don't want to be the dev who's implementing X when the other dev is implementing X, right?
Yep.
Because that doesn't look good. As you know, you're asking, hey, I would like to be promoted to X, and they're like, oh, you spent 4 months doing something that was already being implemented by another team. And it's like, well, that's probably not a good use of your time. So yeah, information is some of it is just like, I guess for me, it comes back to just looking around and not just focus only solely on the code and asking the questions further than the code.
Yep.
It's like, how's this impact our customers? How's it impact the business? Is this actually what our customers want? What are other people doing? How is my implementation going to affect others?
Yep.
Because I think it's very easy to go, that's not my problem. All I care about is implementing X in whatever language. And you get stuck in this software engineer hell.
Yep.
And then you sit there and go, why am I not getting promoted? And it's like, well, it's not just about the code. Like you have to open up your eyes to the other things happening. So
Exactly. It's like walking the factory floor rather than just working your machine. I think that's the way I've tried to look at it. Is when I meet someone and I'm grabbing a coffee or whatever, and they go, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, "No, good. Busy doing some stuff. You keep it short. Don't complain too much. Although depending on the day, I might complain a lot. But and then ask sincerely, like, what are you up to? And you can gain people. Devs love to talk about what they're working on, especially if they're under pressure and stuck. You're going to hear about what the problem is and potentially help out. And if they're not and it's going super well, you're going to find out what they did. And that's where you often get like, oh, you're doing this. The next step of my project is actually to do a similar deployment to what you did. How did you do that? Or I saw you were doing the metrics for like CPU. I'm going to do it for like disk space. How did you handle like stale data? How did you handle this case and that case? 2-minute conversation, and it needn't be the greatest solution. But when you go to your stand up and someone says, how are you planning on doing this? And you go, well, I'm going to do the same approach that team X did. They're like, oh, cool. Do you know who to talk to? Yes, I do. Going to go chat to them. I'll bring back a proposal. This is the standard way that 3 teams did it. They actually based it off of this and this and this. We're good to go.
Well, this is perfect because it actually wraps up like a bunch of what we're talking about. You provide visibility to your team. You're getting visibility into another team. You're making your manager's job easier because he doesn't have to, or she, they don't have to do this middle tier, go back and forth and what you're doing. Like it shows initiative. You're fully autonomous in what you're doing. Yeah, it's all just a accumulation of this. And then, the rest is just measure.
Yep.
Like I think that's probably something we should have said is like whatever you're working on, measure, because if it's not measured, then there's no way to prove it, and then there's no way to put it towards a promotion. Like, whatever it may be, development time, revenue increase, operating cost reduction, pipeline reduction in time. It doesn't matter what the measurement is. You need to measure something, and you need to show that it got better.
So that was my motivating factor for using test-driven development. As weirdly technical as it sounds from the conversation we've been having, implement the tests first, run them, get your benchmark, make your changes, and now you can go back and be like, look, this is where the code is, or where the code was, this is where the code is. It's not a discussion, it's not a subjective measure. This is what I did. I increased the performance by 25% here. This thing now does this, and oh, I've reduced these bugs, and we have like this much more coverage. People love that. I think you're 100% right. Being subjective in a performance review is probably not going to get you far.
Yeah, no one wants to hear just like, well, I implemented a bunch of features. It's like, well, it sounds a lot better if you're like, I implemented feature X and that improved our code coverage by 30%, which means we're less likely to have outages. Or when we do have outages, we've eliminated a bunch of cases that we know have been covered. It makes it easier for onboarding because you can argue that like the test itself does provide context before even reading the code. Because a lot of times I can just read the test. Yeah. Now you need to read the code, and I can understand what the business is doing from the test. Like exactly I've done this with open source projects. I'm like, I don't know where to go look for X in this massive like 50,000 file project. Oh, but I found a test that says like test blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's exactly what I want to know. What's that calling? Great. Those are the files.
Yep.
Yeah. So go ahead.
So now the bit that scares me is the part you just mentioned, because it's kind of like the salesmanship aspect. There's a degree of being good at what you do. That's awesome. Having measurable results is cool. But there's always that one person on the team who just knows how to package themselves a little bit better and how to sell themselves that a little bit more and advertise themselves in such a way that you're like, wow, that's that's an impressive way of doing things. Like I never thought of pitching, like what you just said now about the onboarding. I wouldn't have gone there. I'd be like, oh, now we have the test. We can onboard someone so much easier. Like that's
my manager hat.
There we go. Like that's the thing that I think starts to come in, and there's maybe a metric of something where if you're like on the bottom 5% of that skill, you're screwed, because you're going to be, there's only so far that like a humble brag will take you. You're like, oh yeah, I did some stuff, I increased the performance, and then your manager goes, yeah, he halved the load time and tripled the performance, or the QA managers come in and like complain about how there were so many bugs, and you're like, oh yeah, I fixed them all, really? And you're like, okay, why aren't you selling this to anyone? You've got to figure out how to project these to the visibility you've gotten, I guess. Like you've got the audience, give them something. So that's a hard one. That's a really hard one.
But I think that's a good spot to end.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I think we have covered everything in this, honestly, like for the most part, through everything we've said, and just the accumulation of everything is really how to become a senior developer, and selling it, packaging it, measuring it, and
Perfect.
The development side of getting better as like technical is like read the books,
just do,
continue the process, continue writing code, continue asking for feedback. Yeah. Like that you'll just naturally pick up with time. So, but anyways, we'll leave it there. Awesome. This was really awesome. Another great tech at scale fireside chat, I guess, with Andre. Perfect. On how to become a senior developer. Until next time, adios, everyone.
Cheers.